Twitch is the most popular live streaming platform on the internet. Every month, over 7 million people from around the world use it to stream themselves doing, well, all sorts of things, but there's always been an emphasis on video games. The name Twitch comes from Twitch gameplay, which is when you have to react to something really fast while playing a game. At any given time, millions of people are tuning in to watch their favorite streamers. Some of the biggest ones can have hundreds of thousands of people watching them at the same time. Simply put, live streaming has quickly grown into a multi-billion-dollar industry, and Twitch is the primary place to do it. However, despite its unprecedented popularity, Twitch has been dealing with a number of issues that have contributed to uncertainty concerning the future of the company. I am not saying it is going to shut down anytime soon, I want to be clear about that, but there may be cause for concern as it moves forward. So in this video, I want to outline what I believe to be some of the bigger issues facing Twitch. The two people that are most responsible for creating the platform are Emmett Shear and Justin Kan. In 2005, while attending Yale University, they worked together to create an online calendar application called Kiko that proved to be somewhat successful. But after about a year, they wanted to move on to other projects, so they sold the business on eBay, of all places, for $258,000. The next project was called Justin.tv, where they teamed up with a few others to essentially create an internet-based reality show where Justin Kan would live stream every moment of his life. It was being called life casting. Maybe not the most consistently entertaining show, but it was such a revolutionary, unique idea that it quickly gained an audience. After a few months, they retooled the website to allow users to broadcast themselves over it, establishing different stream categories like music or animals. Over the next few years, the two most popular categories emerged to be sports and video games, but the sports category was problematic because it was mostly people illegally broadcasting copyrighted sporting events. They had to testify in front of a House committee, the company who owned the UFC filed a lawsuit against them, so it became a big hassle, but the video game category looked promising. The video game publishers expressed very few copyright issues and were overall cooperative in having people stream their games. In 2011, they turned the category into its own streaming site called Twitch TV, and that quickly became the company's primary focus. By 2014, it had grown to almost 50 million monthly users, making it one of the most popular sites on the internet and catching the attention of large technology companies like Yahoo and Google. In May of that year, it was being reported that Google was buying Twitch for $1 billion. Twitch was growing fast and wanted a larger company backing them that could help them scale things, and Google was already the owner of YouTube, so you could see how they would be complements to each other. The deal never happened. It would have likely been blocked due to antitrust concerns, plus the people at Twitch felt that their platform would always be Google's secondary focus behind YouTube, which is probably a fair concern. Well, in August of that year, only 3 months later, it was announced that Twitch would be instead acquired by Amazon for $970 million, just a little bit less, but still their largest acquisition ever at the time. Amazon was already involved in gaming before that. They had bought the developer of Killer Instinct, created their own gaming studio, and were technically one of the top video game sellers. Amazon said that they made the deal to show its belief in the future of gaming, which has proven to be accurate. Over the next decade, Twitch grew their user base significantly and were greatly helped by the pandemic when everyone was inside watching stuff on the internet. Those numbers, however, have leveled off, and that leads me to the first issue I want to talk about. Twitch has been losing money. In January of 2024, their CEO Dan Clancy admitted that Twitch was not profitable and has been relying on money from their parent company Amazon to keep things running. It has been an ongoing problem, and that's where things start to get concerning, right? They are already leading the market, so how do they go about raising their revenue or lowering their costs? As Dan Clancy has said, delivering high-definition, low-latency, always available live video to nearly every corner of the world is expensive. Even utilizing Amazon's resources, they are still paying a lot of necessary expenses, and many of the ways that they have tried to lower expenses have been criticized. Most recently, layoffs. It turns out that they may have overestimated their growth rate following the pandemic and hired too many people. In 2023, they laid off 400 employees, and in early 2024, it was another 500, representing over a third of their staff at that point. Around that same time, they shut down the service in South Korea, another unpopular decision, saying that it was too expensive to keep it going over there. I also want to mention that multiple key executives have been leaving the company, most notably co-founder Emmett Shear, who had served as CEO for 12 years before stepping down in 2023. He had recently become a father and said that he was ready to move on, but I don't know, you put it all together together, and it can form a potentially concerning picture. Next up on my list is the revenue split with the streamer. There are many different ways that Twitch streamers can make money. There's a virtual currency called bits that users can send them. They could have sponsored streams, sell merchandise, they have affiliate links, but one of the primary sources is subscription revenue. Viewers can pay money to subscribe to a streamer to get custom emotes that they use in the chat, a badge beside their name, among other things, and I would say it is a great way to show support. There have been exceptions, but traditionally, the money the viewer pays for that subscription gets split 50-50 between the streamer and Twitch, and it has been argued that that is not a great ratio for the streamer. There have been petitions and numerous requests to change the ratio to 70-30, which is the standard for streamers on YouTube. There have been minor adjustments to the revenue split over the years, but the one with the most backlash was in 2022 when they announced that the select group of partners that were receiving the 70-30 split would be lowered to 50-50 after their first 100,000. I know that might not sound like a big issue, but the streamer saw it as a step in the wrong direction, believing that streamers are the core of the platform, and that's the last place that they should be looking to save money. In early 2024, they announced more changes to the revenue split that are still not quite what the streamers are asking for, but much more in their favor. But again, they are already losing money, so unclear what the smart decision is there. Somewhat related, in 2023, they announced new guidelines for the streamers regarding sponsors, mainly saying that burned-in advertisements were prohibited and they couldn't show logos that take up more than 3% of the screen size, a very specific number, and boy was that an unpopular announcement. You have to consider that sponsors are a big source of revenue for many streamers, and in many cases used to supplement that 50-50 revenue split. There was tremendous opposition to the new rules. Major streamers were threatening to leave the platform, so Twitch quickly apologized and said that they would rewrite those rules. But you see how a lot of the streamers are developing this hostile relationship with Twitch? They feel disrespected and just getting upset with the platform. Going back to the list, a quick one to follow up on the revenue split would be a major data breach. In 2021, it was big news when a hacker accessed their data due to an error in a Twitch server configuration change. Mainly, information was leaked about creator payouts from the past few years. Admittedly, probably not the most detrimental thing that could have happened to Twitch, but it still should not have happened. It made everyone question whether or not they could trust Twitch with their sensitive information, further straining their relationship with everyone who uses the service. Next up on my list is gambling. It has been a massive debate within the Twitch community over the past few years. It became a big thing where streamers would go online and bet large amounts of money. Even the rapper Drake was sponsored by an Australian online casino called Stake.com, where he would stream himself on Twitch, betting a lot of money on their site. And then there was this other streamer that tricked a bunch of people in the community into giving him over $200,000 that was used to support his gambling habits. Clearly, there are ethical questions to consider involving all of this, one of the big ones being the influence on kids who access these streams. So after plenty of protest in 2022, Twitch banned the streaming of gambling sites like Stake.com that were not licensed in the US, leading me straight into the final issue on my list, competition. To this point, Twitch has always been far ahead of any competitor when it comes to live streaming video games. In 2015, shortly after that Google Twitch acquisition failed to happen, YouTube Gaming was launched as their answer to Twitch. But despite the traffic coming from YouTube and the more favorable revenue split and everything else, it has failed to catch up to Twitch. The audience is just not there, so in 2019, they shut down the YouTube Gaming app and integrated it into the traditional YouTube app. In 2016, Microsoft acquired a service that they renamed Mixer and even made big money contracts with some of the most popular streamers like Ninja and Shroud to go onto their platform, but again, they fell short. By 2020, they were only getting around 3% of the viewership of Twitch and decided to shut down. In 2022, following Twitch's announcement that they would ban gambling, the people behind one of those gambling sites, Stake.com, started their own streaming service to compete with Twitch. That is a bit of a twist, and they have been making quite an impact. Obviously, they don't have nearly as strong of a user base, but they have been growing faster than you might expect, and have attracted notable streamers. Some creators are switching over to Kick because they have much more relaxed rules when it comes to gambling and all sorts of other craziness, and their revenue split is 95-5. Yeah, the streamer keeps 95% of the revenue, which is far better than any other notable platform has ever offered. And they have also made deals with major streamers, the most notable one being with XQC, valued around $100 million. I mean, that is was bigger than most professional sports contracts. When the New York Times reported on it, they said it was a significant blow to the Amazon-owned site and a sign of its increasingly strained relationship with content creators. So that does not sound good. Now, Kick is also clearly losing money with all those expenses and low revenue, so they are essentially being kept afloat by Stake.com, again raising all sorts of ethical questions regarding their ties to gambling. So, I don't know, live streaming services just don't seem to be profitable. They're all being supported by bigger companies that hope their investment will pay off in the future, but it's unclear exactly how that's going to happen. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about Twitch? Have you used them as a streamer or a viewer, and how does it compare to streaming on YouTube or Kick? Are they unique enough to outlast all the others and remain on top, or do all of their issues leave an opportunity for others to catch up to them? What do they need to do to improve things and restore their reputation? Though it's not like the others have the best reputations either, so a lot to consider. I also want to point out that this is not a complete list of all of their issues. There have been controversies involving streamers being unfairly banned, or hot tub streams and sexualized content, and so many others. These are just the ones that I feel are the most significant or impactful to the company itself. Please let me know if you think something should be added or subtracted from it, and any other thoughts you have about Twitch, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you. I couldn't even tell you how much time I've spent watching Netflix. Today, we all think of them as this video streaming service, but I'm sure many of you remember they actually started out by renting DVDs through the mail. That was their entire business for 9 years that built them up to $1 billion in revenue and put them in a perfect position to lead the streaming market. So today, I'm gonna focus more on the DVD years as I talk about how Netflix was built and highlight some of the key reasons behind their success. There were two guys that started Netflix together. They were Mark Randolph and Reed Hastings. Now, you may have heard this one. The popular story is that Reed rented a VHS copy of Apollo 13 from Blockbuster, lost it for a while, and then when he finally returned it 6 weeks later, he was charged a $40 late fee. I guess his experience made him upset with their policies and motivated him to create something better. From what I can tell, that story is not true. It's a good story. I can see why they would want it to be true. It's actually the perfect story. It puts down their biggest competitor in a relatable way while highlighting a reason that they themselves are better and that they don't charge late fees. It's almost a little too convenient. Over the years, Reed has been the main person to promote it, but each time he tells it, the details are a little inconsistent. Plus, his co-founder Mark Randolph has come out and said that it's completely fabricated. The founding stories are just that. They're stories. They're constructs that we come up with to take what's a very messy process with input from many people and condense it into a story which we can get across in a sentence or two. He says that's the story that the press chooses to run because that's what people want to hear. I think it's pretty clear what's happening here, so I'd like to talk about what actually happened. I had to piece it together a bit, but this is very consistent with Randolph's version of it. See, before Netflix, they were both working in Silicon Valley's software industry. In 1991, Reed Hastings was a co-founder and partial owner of a company called Pure Software. Within 5 years, that company had grown so large that they were involved in a near billion-dollar merger with a similar company called Atria, which formed a new company called Pure Atria. Soon after, they acquired a much smaller startup company. It only had 9 people, but one of those 9 people was Mark Randolph. He soon became the head of marketing, where he would work with Reed. The two were also involved in this carpooling thing because they live close together, and through all of it, they became friends. Well, about a year after the big merger, there was even more consolidation when Rational Software acquired Pure Atria. It was a move that meant that Reed and Randolph would soon be leaving the company. They were caught in this weird transition period where they had to stay for a few months while the deals were finalized, so day to day, there wasn't too much going on. For my first reason for their success, I'm gonna say that these were pretty incredible circumstances. When it comes to starting a new business, it's hard to even imagine better ones. They had the time, money, and experience to think of something and make it happen. According to Randolph, they spent those morning commutes trying to figure out their next big business idea. He says that he would even spend a portion of a slow day at work researching those ideas. Early on, they established that an e-commerce company was the way they wanted to go. This was 1997, internet sales were growing, and they correctly predicted that they would continue to do so. But they didn't know what to sell. At one point, point, they were gravitating toward the idea of movies, but they were all on VHS still, and they quickly concluded that shipping VHS tapes would not allow for a profitable business. But then, DVDs. That's my second reason behind their success, because these two had to be among the first people out there to learn about them, take them seriously, and actually see their potential. In the United States, DVDs were released in early 1997, and these two were investigating them almost immediately. Early on, they actually wanted to test how a DVD would hold up being sent through the mail, but they were so new and obscure that they could not find one, and were forced to test it with a CD instead. The test went well, of course, and in April of 1998, they started Netflix. Everything was lining up here. It's strange to think that if DVDs had not been introduced right at that exact time, Netflix would likely have never existed. I would go so far as to argue that the obscurity of DVDs is the biggest reason that they made it through their first couple of years. When the service first launched, they offered 7-day DVD rentals for the price of $4 plus $2 shipping, in addition to selling new DVDs. In fact, for their first year, they actually brought in more money from selling them rather than renting them. We can see their prices were a little steep, but considering DVDs were still so new and hard to find, the customer didn't have many other options. Which leads me to my next reason, moving their focus to the rentals. In March of 1999, they completely stopped selling new movies, which I would consider to be a bold move, to completely cut off their main source of revenue. For that year, the sales accounted for only 3% of their revenue from those first couple of months, and by the year 2000, it was 0%. They did this because they felt that it was necessary. They realized that they were getting sales because of that extreme lack of competition, but what would happen once that competition started catching up? If DVDs were, in fact, the next big thing, which they were, it meant that they would soon be sold in stores across the country, and at that point, what good is Netflix? They knew that they were heading down a bad path, and felt that the rentals would be the thing to make them stand out. But when you account for shipping, they were still $6 each, which leads me into my next reason, switching into a subscription model. In September of 1999, they announced their first ever monthly subscription plan. They called it their Marquee program. It consisted of 4 rentals for $15.95 a month, including shipping. That was quickly adjusted a few months later to $19.95 a month, but now it was for unlimited rentals. You just couldn't have more than 4 at a time, which was then shifted to 3 at a time a few months after that. It was big for them in that it established all these reoccurring customers, and due to the structure of the program, there were no due dates or late fees. Blockbuster had due dates and late fees, which people hated, so this gave them more reason to switch over to Netflix. That's how you know that Apollo 13 rental story is fake, by the way. Netflix did have due dates and late fees for the first year and a half, so that excessive late fee didn't motivate him to start a company without late fees, because the company he started did, in fact, have late fees. It just doesn't make sense. Alright, next up, and you have to respect this one, Netflix always thought in the long term, meaning that they were never too concerned with making some quick money. They were always thinking ahead and trying to build something that would last. I think I've already showed this in a couple of ways, but my favorite one is in their net income. I like it because it's a perfect example of sacrificing something now so you can have more later. For their first 5 years, Netflix made no money. Over that span, they lost over $150 million. The reason they were able to keep things running was because they did have believers. In the beginning, it was Reed Hastings himself investing money that he had from the sale of his previous company. In 1999, they had received $30 million in funding from a venture capitalist. And the big one, in 2002, they raised $82 million through a public stock offering. And a big reason that they weren't making any money is their marketing expenses. That's my next reason. As I just talked about, financially, they found a way to get away with it, but Netflix went crazy with their marketing budget. They would run advertisements all over the internet. They would have traditional TV and radio commercials, send people emails, prints in their actual mail. They would offer free trials of their service that were very effective because something like 90% of them would lead to a paid subscription. They had all these deals with stores or the companies that made DVD players. They would put these little inserts in the box, or the deal was to run these promotions where people who bought the DVD players would receive free rentals. Toshiba, Apple, HP, Best Buy, they were working with all of them in various ways to get the Netflix name out there. It was kind of like they were paying to create all these little sparks all over the the place that would eventually grow into their own sustainable fire. This graph represents their marketing costs as a percentage of their revenue. Their first few years were just outrageous. Remember, if this is over 100%, that means that they're spending more money on marketing than they're making, which means even if they had no other expenses, they still wouldn't be turning a profit. But as time went on, they brought that percentage down. I want to point out that their marketing expenses are almost always going up. It's just that their percentage has dropped because their revenue has gone up more. I'm gonna combine the next two and say their selection along with their recommendations. I put them together because they're both ways that the customer ends up with a better movie. When Netflix started, there were about 1,000 DVD titles in print, and they offered 925 of them. Through those DVD years, they always offered a high percentage of what was available, much higher than you would find at your typical Blockbuster or video rental store. In the year 2000, they started these revenue sharing agreements with the studios that allowed them to get discounts when they bought a high volume of DVDs, and within a couple of years, they had these deals in place with over 50 distributors. As far as their recommendations, Cinematch. I don't know how it works, but it's their computerized system for recommending movie titles they started in the year 2000 that's proven to be effective. It's based on what you watch and the ratings you give it and how those ratings compare to the ratings of others. I don't know, but considering their biggest competition in this area at the time were the recommendations from the guy who worked at Blockbuster, I'd say it helped separate them. Finally, we all know where this is headed, streaming. In 2004, they announced this partnership with TiVo, saying that they would work together to develop an effective way to stream movies over the internet to people's homes. Everyone was excited about this, being able to watch movies through your TiVo device, but it actually took 4 years for anything to happen here. In reality, the first Netflix streaming was offered in 2007 through their Watch Now service. It was provided as more of a bonus to the people who already subscribed to the DVD service. I wouldn't say it was a great service, it only offered about 5% of the titles available through the mail, but it was a start, and offering it to their existing customers was an effective way in getting them to make that transition with them from DVDs to streaming, which was obviously important. Today, streaming accounts for over 98% of their revenue. There is too much to say about this, so let me know if you want me to talk about it in a separate video. Possibly detailing the transition, the competitors. Quickster was a disaster. It's helped lead to the production of Netflix originals. I mean, since the introduction of streaming, they've raised their revenue from 1 billion to 20 billion, but for now, I'm gonna leave it at that. Let me know in the comments, do you agree with my reasons? It's not a complete list, but I found those to be the most significant. Also, what do you think of Netflix? Are you one of their 180 million subscribers? And if you are, when did you join? Have you ever received one of those DVDs through the mail? Maybe you were one of the original supporters back in the 90s. Maybe you're still part of their DVD plan. So any thoughts you have about any of it, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.